My name is Diane Sullivan. I am an entrepreneurship scholar from the Management and Marketing Department in the School of Business. So today I'll be presenting a paper and a project that I've been working on that for purposes of today I've entitled How Entrepreneurs Can Use Their Knowledge and Networks to Increase the Number of People That They Employ. Now, it's certainly no secret that recent years have seen a global economic downturn. In the U.S., we've seen this indicated through historically high unemployment rates. In 2010, for example, the U.S. saw its highest unemployment rate in 27 years at 9.6%. Now, the brunt of these employment challenges have been felt in large organizations, but smaller entrepreneurial firms have not been immune. Now, this is a problem because it turns out that small entrepreneurial firms employ more than 50% of the U.S. workforce. So naturally, as an entrepreneurship scholar, I thought it was timely to examine factors that relate to the number of workers that entrepreneurs employ. So in this research, I've sought to do just that, and I examined two factors that have been found to be theoretically and practically useful for explaining entrepreneurial performance outcomes, things like the number of employees in firms. Specifically, I examine how characteristics of entrepreneurs' knowledge sets relate to the number of workers they employ, as well as how characteristics of entrepreneurs' networks, or the people that they're connected to, relate to the number of workers that they employ. I also examine these relationships during early stages of venture development, and in particular, I focus on how these relationships unfold across two phases of venture development, from venture launch through the end of the first year of firm operations, which is a time period in the entrepreneurship literature we consider consistent with early venture development or early venture growth stages of firm operations. And I specifically chose to look at these relationships during these early phases of firm operations because employing workers has been found to relate to venture survival in the short run and venture prosperity in the long run. So with that stage set, I'd like to move along and begin talking about my first hypothesis, which proposes a positive relationship between the comprehensiveness of an entrepreneur's business knowledge set at venture launch and venture performance in terms of the number of workers that they employ in early venture development. Now, I developed this expectation drawing from a theoretical premise we use in the entrepreneurship literature called the knowledge-based view. And very broadly, the knowledge-based view suggests that knowledge is a strategically valuable resource that can form the basis of a firm's competitive advantage. In addition, the research suggests that when entrepreneurs use this knowledge, and it can help them form an advantage because it improves their abilities to exploit opportunities. And in general, research has found that when entrepreneurs have broadly more knowledge, they tend to be associated with firms who have better survival chances and grow more and things like that. In addition, research has found that early on, knowledge is one of the first resources that entrepreneurs have access to, and that knowledge exists primarily in the mind of the individual founder. However, and unfortunately, although one of the first resources that entrepreneurs have, scholars have found that early on, entrepreneurs tend to be more constrained by knowledge limitations than they are by other resource limitations like financial resources. However, I believe that during the early stages of venture development, when entrepreneurs have a broader base of business knowledge, they should be better positioned to survive the challenging early stages of venture development. That is, when entrepreneurs possess knowledge about multiple business domains, I think that they should be better positioned to develop solutions when problems are encountered, which should help them achieve higher performance outcomes, which leads to the first hypothesis that I examine. H1, there'll be a positive relationship between the comprehensiveness of entrepreneurs' business knowledge set at venture launch and venture performance in early venture development. Now, although I've predicted this positive and direct relationship between entrepreneurs' knowledge and venture performance, I actually think this is more complicated than just a simple main effect. And I think that because if we go back into the knowledge-based view literature, and if we look at some scholarship in economics, it suggests that individuals' knowledge sets are characterized by these inadequacies, which hampers their ability to apply that knowledge and for it to create value for them when they try to do things like develop ventures. This is because individuals, in the case of entrepreneurs, are thought to have these inherent knowledge shortcomings because their knowledge sets are basically specialized based on the prior experiences that they have. these knowledge shortcomings have also been found to be particularly prominent during early stages of venture development. Now, I believe that because entrepreneurs realize this, they're probably going to seek different avenues through which they can reduce the effects of these knowledge shortcomings. And I believe that recent advancements in network theory suggest that entrepreneurs might be able to utilize their network ties to help facilitate this. So what the heck are networks? Well, in the world of entrepreneurship, networks or network ties are simply individuals that entrepreneurs are connected to that are helpful for venture-related purposes. These networks can consist of any number of individuals. They could be parents and siblings, suppliers, friends, professors, investors, customers, and so forth. Now, research in looking at the value of networks has suggested that networks enhance the stocks of knowledge that individuals, including entrepreneurs, have access to. Via interacting with network partners, entrepreneurs can, in essence, gain access to knowledge that exists in the external environment that they can combine with their knowledge. And these relationships, basically, through interaction over time, create a context where entrepreneurs can apply knowledge more effectively towards venture development outcomes. And that sounds great, right? But is it just any kinds of network ties or individuals that are helpful for these purposes? Well, recent research has started to discern if there are different subgroups or specific types of individuals that are more or less useful for different purposes. And research in this area has specifically started to look at subsets of network ties, or what are called action sets. And the general idea behind action sets are that individuals can basically activate different subgroups of network ties to help them mobilize different resources that they need at different times. Now, two particular action sets that have garnered some interest in the recent entrepreneurship literature are family network tie action sets and non-family network tie action sets. Now, family network tie action sets are simply individuals in entrepreneurs' networks that are helpful for venture-related purposes, but that are kin to the entrepreneur. They're related to the entrepreneur, so parents, siblings, and so forth. Where non-family network tie action sets are people within entrepreneurs' networks that are helpful for venture-related purposes, but that are not related to the entrepreneur. And very generally, research that has looked at these different network tie action sets have begun to suggest that these action sets provide different usefulness or different resources to entrepreneurs. Family network ties, for example, have been found to provide entrepreneurs with access to knowledge and resources related to obtaining initial seed funding, initial resources related to moral and psychological support, a depth of knowledge and information sharing, and also knowledge and feedback related to entrepreneurial ideas and opportunities the entrepreneur has under consideration. Alternatively, non-family network ties have been found to provide entrepreneurs access to different kinds of resources. Things like knowledge and resources related to identifying new customers, knowledge and resources related to enhancing management, financial, and production capabilities, and they've been found to provide new or novel market information for entrepreneurs. So in sum, both of these network tie action sets appear to be useful, but for different purposes. All right, so if we think about kind of the sum of what I've just talked about, we said that entrepreneurs' knowledge sets are helpful for achieving venture performance. Unfortunately, those knowledge sets are inadequate due to inherent knowledge shortcomings. But fortunately, networks increase the stocks of knowledge that entrepreneurs have access to, and recent research suggests that different network tie action sets, like family and non-family network ties, can provide access to these different resources. I think that when we take these ideas together, it suggests that, to me, although the extent of entrepreneurs' knowledge promotes venture performance, entrepreneurs' networks may improve the value of that knowledge when trying to achieve venture performance outcomes. Overall suggesting a moderating relationship in my next two hypotheses. H2, the relationship between an entrepreneur's business-related knowledge at venture launch and venture performance in early venture development will be moderated by the number of family network ties in entrepreneurs' networks, where more family network ties will increase this relationship. And H3, the relationship between entrepreneurs' business-related knowledge set at venture launch and venture performance in early venture development will be moderated by the number of non-family network ties, where more non-family network ties will strengthen this relationship. Okay, so you're probably sitting there saying, great, so networks are all important. Well, I actually think that That's kind of true, but I also believe that the relative value of these networks are likely to vary. If we look at the resource needs that entrepreneurs have in different stages of venture development, they require different things. For example, in very early stages of venture development, those prior to launch and maybe up to launch, which we call venture emergence in entrepreneurship, entrepreneurs' prominent resource needs center around things related to identifying initial seed money, moral and psychological support, knowledge about the ideas that they're considering pursuing. Alternatively, later stages of venture development require different resource needs, things related to achieving broader growth objectives, like new customers, new and novel market information, and enhancing their managerial capabilities. So if we take those ideas in line with the resources that these different network tie action sets provide, it seems that these network tie action sets might be useful to entrepreneurs during different phases of venture development. As I've already talked about, family network ties, and you've probably guessed this at this point, seem to provide resources that might be more useful to entrepreneurs in those very early stages of venture development, the venture emergence pre-launch stages. Another interesting characteristic about family network ties is that they are thought to succumb to this phenomenon called over-embeddedness. And when network ties or relationships become over-embedded, it basically means that they're very socio-emotionally close ties. And when people have very socio-emotionally close relationships or over-embedded ties, these are people that tend to share all the knowledge and information that they have with one another over time, so that the knowledge and information circling amongst them becomes redundant. There's nothing new coming in. These individuals also, because of attraction similarity phenomenon, wind up running kind of in a common circle of friends, so their abilities to introduce one another to new network connections tends to be limited. Alternatively, when we look at network ties that don't tend to be prone to this over-embeddedness challenge, like non-family network ties, first of all, they're thought to provide resources that seem to be in line with achieving broader growth objectives, as we've already talked about. New market information, enhanced management production capabilities, and things of that nature. And because they're not subject to these over-embeddedness challenges, these non-family network ties or over-embedded ties provide novel knowledge, novel information, and access to new network connections that can help facilitate venture development. Now, in this research, I'm interested, I guess I should go to my next slide before I go there. So in sum, if we look at the resources provided by family network ties, they seem to be very helpful early on, whereas non-family network ties are helpful for providing resources related to broader growth objectives. So in this research, I'm interested in explaining venture performance in early venture development. And so because of that, I believe that non-family network ties are likely to be more important than family network ties. That leads to my fourth and final hypothesis: the strength of the moderating effect for family versus non-family network ties on the relationship between entrepreneurs' knowledge and venture performance will be stronger for non-family network ties compared to family network ties. Now, to test these hypotheses, I conducted a mass mail survey study and employed a modified version of Dillman's 5-point contact method. And because I was interested in examining relationships in early stages of venture development, this entailed me identifying a sample of entrepreneurs that were in very early stages of venture development. So what I did was I followed prior research and selected the date that a founder filed for the incorporation of a firm as an indicator of venture launch. And so I identified all of the individuals that filed for the incorporation of a firm in a southern U.S. state in January of 2005. I then selected a random sample of those individuals and sent out my first mailing to them in January of 2006, 1 year after they launched their venture. So they were receiving this survey in the early venture development or growth stages of firm operations. I ultimately wound up with 174 usable surveys, and you can see the characteristics of that sample there. So to test my dependent variable, the number of employees in early venture development, because my respondents were receiving the survey 1 year after launching their venture in early venture development, I simply asked my participants to indicate the total number of full-time employees currently working in their organization. For the independent variables of entrepreneurs' knowledge at launch, I asked my respondents to retrospectively recall the areas of expertise that they possessed 1 year prior to receiving my survey at venture launch. I presented my respondents with 11 different business functional areas which were thought to represent a reasonably comprehensive list of value chain activities for which some knowledge would be required to successfully launch and run most businesses. And then I created a ratio of areas of expertise the entrepreneurs possessed to total possible knowledge areas. So in this case, numbers closer to +1 would indicate a more comprehensive knowledge set. For my network ties at launch independent variable, I used a method from the network literature called the name generator method, where I asked my respondents, again, to retrospectively recall the individuals who were helpful to them at venture launch 1 year prior to receiving my survey. They simply listed the names of those individuals and then categorized the nature of the relationship as being family versus non-family members. And then I counted the number of individuals for that variable. Given the nature of the relationships I was examining, of course, I needed to control a number of variables, which were these you see here. And to test my relationships, I used hierarchical moderated multiple regression analysis. For any of the models that employed moderators, I mean-centered the predictor variables to reduce multicollinearity, and I made sure that the variance inflation factors were within suitable ranges, which they were. So with that, my first hypothesis predicted a positive relationship between the comprehensiveness of entrepreneurs' business knowledge at venture launch and venture performance in early venture development, and that hypothesis, as you can see, was supported. H2 looked at the moderating effect of family network ties on the relationship between entrepreneurs' knowledge and venture launch. I did not find significance for that hypothesis. It was not supported. But for hypothesis 3, I did find a significant relationship for the moderating effect of non-family network ties on the relationship between entrepreneurs' knowledge at launch and venture performance in early venture development. But to more fully understand the nature of the relationship, I plotted the interaction. And as anticipated, the relationship between entrepreneurs' knowledge at launch and number of workers in early venture development was stronger when entrepreneurs had high non-family network ties. For entrepreneurs with low non-family network ties, the positive relationship between entrepreneurs' knowledge at launch and venture performance in terms of number of workers at early venture development was weaker. We also tested the slopes, and that corroborated this research finding, overall suggesting that H3 was supported. And finally, hypothesis 4, I predicted the strength of the moderating effect would be stronger for non-family network ties when compared to family network ties, because I found significance for non-family members, but not family members. That hypothesis was kind of de facto supported. All right, so with this research, I sought to examine the direct and interactive relationships associated with entrepreneurs' knowledge, network tie action sets, and venture performance in terms of number of workers. And overall, the results contribute to prior research that has sought to examine the value of knowledge relative to entrepreneurship. In particular, my findings do corroborate prior research that has suggested that entrepreneurs' knowledge is important for achieving different venture development outcomes like survival and growth. And in particular, that entrepreneurs' knowledge is very important during early stages of venture development. But perhaps relative to H1, the biggest contribution is that, to my knowledge, this is the first empirical study to demonstrate that this relationship holds up across developmental phases of firm operations. Beyond looking at knowledge, this research also contributes to and extends research looking at network theory relative to entrepreneurship. One of the biggest findings that we found here is that different network action sets do seem to matter and contribute in different and meaningful ways to the entrepreneurial process. This finding is particularly interesting when we look at the combination of results for hypotheses 2 through 4, which suggests that at least when it comes to reducing the effects of entrepreneurs' knowledge shortcomings in early venture development, non-family network ties do appear to be more valuable than family network ties. Most broadly, though, our research empirically demonstrates how different network tie action sets are valuable, and specifically across varying stages of venture development.